If you have not ended it yourself, it's not going to end for you. Let's say you worked about 8 to 9 hours, you cleared about 150 emails, you worked on them, you answered, you cleared, you deleted. You're going home, on the way home, you check your phone. You have another slew of emails coming. You cannot stop them coming in, but you can stop yourself from continuing working on them and putting that boundary. Your day has ended. I have not learned to put boundaries. I expanded them. I became worse as I went along in my career. Every position that I took was sort of sandwiched between managing employees and dealing with patients' grievances and patients' medical situation. And I discovered a couple of things about myself. I discovered skills that I never knew I had, that I had an absolutely amazing way of connecting with people. And I guess the defining moment for me probably was.
Hi, Yana. Welcome to Becoming You. Thank you so much for being on the show.
Hi, Katrina. Thank you for inviting me. I'm very excited.
Absolutely. Yeah, I'm definitely excited too. The topic of burnout, which we're going to be diving into, is something that I think affects a lot of us. And we think about, burnout in a lot of different ways, whether it's personal, family, work, and so on and so forth. So I think it'll really resonate with the audience. And I'm excited to just get not only your experience in this conversation, but also your expertise and some resources at the end that can really help folks navigate through this cycle of burnout that a lot of times we unfortunately find ourselves in.
Yeah.
Can you kind of give a definition of burnout just so we have a starting point and then we'll go from there?
Sure. The definition of burnout is an emotional state that actually transitions to the physical state, not just a state of mind, but a state of your entire body after you experience a prolonged, unresolved stress. And everybody is thinking about burnout as, let's say, a workplace burnout, corporate burnout, but there is a lot of different facets of it. There is a burnout of being a parent, burnout of a new parent, burnout of a caretaker, um, let's say aid workers. There are many different categories of population that are affected by burnout.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So if you look at it this way, it means that burnout has become a modern day epidemic.
Right.
Unfortunately, disproportionately affecting women. I'm not just advocating for women, but I've gone through this myself, so I'm speaking about what I know.
Right.
But through my journey of researching this topic, I have spoken to so many people, men and women, and actually, anecdotally, just yesterday, I spoke to a young gentleman from GoDaddy. He was just a representative that helped me with some one issue. And he was so taken in. He started telling me about his own story,
Wow.
just randomly.
Right.
How he's being sick before his shifts come on, how he's throwing up, how sick he is, and so on. So this is a huge issue.
Yeah, it definitely sounds like that. And I think that the work that you're doing and your passion for this topic and just I know it's more than just a topic because it does affect your life and your being, but there's something to be said about, meeting a random stranger and having him open right up to you and having that common ground. I think you are attracting this conversation, you're inviting it today. And it's something that's, like I said, very relevant, very timely. I'm seeing a lot of people posting about it too. And as you mentioned, unfortunately, women are maybe more negatively impacted by this phenomenon, this epidemic that you mentioned. And even when I think about, and this is a question I had for you, and I know neither of us are necessarily medical experts, but we are both women. We know how a cycle works, right? And women's cycles are more on a monthly basis rather than a man's cycle, which is more on the 24-hour clock. And there's been a lot of research on that too. But basically, a man's energy gets replenished and reset much more rapidly than a woman's does. A woman kind of goes through 4 different seasons every single month: spring, summer, fall, winter, and so on. And I think about even myself and how we manage our schedules. I heard it recently, when you're thinking about if you have time, if you're available, if you're free, it's really, do I have the energy for this? Do I have the bandwidth for that? And then how do you determine what you have time for, what you have energy for? And I think that there's certain days of the week, days of the month, hours in the day where you do feel more motivated to get something done versus another time. And I'm curious too, not just with our biology, but also our passion. So if you're thinking about something that maybe you don't have the energy for, but you're passionate about, maybe you can overcome those feelings of, oh, I don't really want to do this right now, but I believe in this so much, so I'm going to get it done. Versus if you don't have that passion, then it's just kind of compounding those feelings of stress and anxiety and dread, of working on whatever it is that you're trying to avoid in that moment.
Well, definitely. Your cognitive relationship to what you do, whether it's work or your hobby or something for your family, spending time, achieving some tasks, of course, it has a lot to do with it. Actually, again, anecdotally, in my own family, my niece's husband is in postdoctorate program, and he's working around the clock, and he's also researching. His topic of research has something to do with the brain, and I shared my observations and what I'm working on with him. And I mentioned that everybody should be really on a lookout and being aware of the dangers of burnout,
Mm-hmm.
because our brain is just like a muscle, and it can only function for so long. But with the muscle, we actually feel it. Let's say if you're working out at the gym, or you're doing something at home, and the muscle is fatigued, you stop.
Right.
Our brain is fatiguing after 40 to 45 minutes. That's why all the classes in schools and universities are in a 45-minute cycle. So his response was, if I had worked on a 40-minute cycle, he said, I would have never had anything done.
Wow.
He said, it's unattainable. It's
Right.
not sustainable. It's impossible. He said, I am the best when I'm in the zone and I'm working hours after hours. Well, maybe for him, this is the right um, way to approach it. Maybe because he's stimulated by it and he enjoys and he loves it.
Yeah.
The stress is being sort of superseded in our brain.
Right. I think there's something to be said about that. When you are in that state of flow, you can kind of just tune the world out and get creative or get productive, for 4 or 5 hours on end.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yep.
there's something very fulfilling about being in that state of flow where you have no distractions and you're just really in your element. But again, like you're saying, this is it sounds like a neuroscientist or something like that, like a neuro doctor,
Mm-hmm.
where
Yes.
that's his
Right.
specialty. And so that's his playground, and for someone who's maybe in the arts, like doing something artistic would be their playground. So when we think about state of flow, I don't know if you can necessarily just be in that zone in any area of your life, but there's definitely a couple areas that maybe you would find yourself, able to overcome that 45-minute fatigue.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas in most areas, I think it's safe to say we can only take in so much, and then after a while, you're just kind of like, okay, that's enough. Give me a break.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Our brain is, and if you miss the early signs, early symptoms of it, when your body is telling you, then your body is going into the mode when, we're not medical experts. I'm just going to explain in a layman terms.
Sure. Yeah.
The high level of the negative hormones are basically applied to your body day after day, and then months after months, and a year after year. And then when you started to experience changes in your limbic brain and symptoms, severe clinical symptoms that I experienced myself,
Mm-hmm.
and then there's a lot of things happening as a severe symptoms. You have chronic fatigue sets in. You have disengagement, disenchantment. Your relationship suffers. You're becoming a bad parent.
Right.
Uh, you try to do the best you can at work, but you can't. You can no longer achieve what you were able to achieve maybe a
Mm-hmm.
year or two ago.
Mm-hmm.
And then fear sets in,
Right.
and then panic,
Yeah.
and all sort of spiraling out of control, negative things. And I've just listened to a lecture of one physician who suffered burnout himself. He's from England. And he said, basically, the way I see it, the population is divided into two categories: people who are burnout and those who are on the way to burnout, they're not aware of it yet.
Wow. So it's
And it
affecting
does hold
everyone.
some water.
Yeah. Right. We're like treading
It does
water. We're
affect
just trying to
everyone.
stay afloat. Such a good way of putting it. Um,
Absolutely.
and I
Yes.
know you had mentioned to me, I
It,
just want to,
it does has to do,
oh, go ahead. Go ahead.
yes, go ahead.
No, you're fine. Go ahead.
It does has to do with the way we changed our work patterns, with the way our economy, which mainly became a knowledge economy, has changed our work patterns.
Mm,
And we have a hard time establishing boundaries. And everybody's talking about boundaries, boundaries. It's not just being rude and saying no.
right.
No, it's a boundary for yourself too. A
Hmm.
lot of people have a hard time establishing boundaries by defining where your work day started and where it ended. Because in a lot of ways, if you have not ended it yourself, it's not going to end for you. Let's say you worked about 8 to 9 hours, you cleared about 150 emails, so some people much more, but considerably more. You worked on them, you answered, you cleared, you deleted. You're going home. On the way home, you check your phone. You have another slew of emails coming. You cannot stop them coming in, but you can stop yourself from continuing working on them and putting that boundary. Your day has ended.
Yeah. I love that. It's so
And that's
important.
where the real trouble begins nowadays.
Yeah, you're right. It's very important to know how to establish boundaries and to understand that your boundaries are something that is within your control. It's not something that you impress on someone else to do and now it's their responsibility. That would be a rule that you're putting on them. A boundary is, hey, I'm not going to check my emails after 6 p.m. because it's dinner time and I'm not going to look at my phone and I'm going to silence it and it can wait. Business will always be there and I'll get to it when I get to it. I know some people whose voicemail even specifies when they'll get back to you if you're giving them a call. Maybe they check their phones from 11 a.m. to noon, something like that, just so that they're not
Mhm.
feeling tied to all of this technology, right? We make the world so accessible that we feel entitled to everyone's time and energy. And the reality is, if we are showing up in that way where we're giving everyone our time and energy at their beck and call, they don't respect us, they don't
Mhm.
appreciate us, and we actually lose sight of ourselves in the process because we're just giving everything and we have nothing left for ourselves, and I think that that's ultimately what leads to this burnout. And unfortunately, it's usually not enough just to get a new job or replace, whatever it is that you think is stressing you out, because the patterns are still there. So unless you make serious change and
Absolutely.
intentional improvements on these boundaries and how you show up for yourself, really the bigger picture doesn't shift at all. And the burnout is still underlying and it still continues.
Absolutely. I actually traveled with that issue. I brought it with me through every job I have worked.
Right.
And not only that, I have not learned to put boundaries, I expanded them. I became worse as I went along in my career. And I guess the defining moment for me probably was when I entered a career in healthcare administration. Every position that I took was sort of sandwiched between managing employees and dealing with patients' grievances, and patients' medical situation.
Hmm.
And I discovered a couple of things about myself. I discovered skills that I never knew I had. That I had an absolutely amazing way of connecting with people, and I didn't know. To the point though that everybody started leaning on me,
Right.
from the staff to the patients. And my own empathy starting open up in a way that I had no, it was like an ocean. Somebody opened the gate and an ocean was flowing out of it. I didn't know how to stop it, nor did I want to.
Right.
As I was managing a project for the building another, let's say, office, dealing with architects and builders, I was also dealing with the personal issues of an employee and a health issue of the patient. And there is no human being that can fit this in a regular workday. So I keep working during my commute. I keep working on the weekend. And with that, I couldn't shake it off emotionally.
Right.
I brought it with me in every way.
Yeah.
It consumed me.
Yeah. So you're basically saying it sounds like there was someone on your team who couldn't perform because of their family issue, right? And then you were picking up the slack to make sure that the work was
Yes.
still getting done. And because you knew what was going on in their
Yeah.
life, that's taking an emotional toll on you, on top of the fact that you're doing the
Hmm.
work 7 days a week. Wow. That's a lot.
Absolutely. Plus, in order for me to be able to handle what I had, the workload that I had, what I had on my desk, on my plate, I had to increase my work hours. So I would show up at work. Let's say everybody would be there at 9, I would be there at 7 a.m. That means I would get up at 4:30. Everybody would leave at 5, I would leave at 7 p.m. That means I would show up at home close to 9. I was so exhausted. By the time my burnout symptoms showed up as clinical symptoms, by the time I gradually became very sick. I was really given 150% of myself. And I didn't realize what was happening to me. I actually thought if I started to work out, I am going to beat this. So I became what I call an accidental athlete. At the age of 50, I started to work out with the trainer. I still do.
Oh, I love
I became
that.
athletic.
Yeah, that's great. And it's funny,
And it's probably,
I like how you said that you're an accidental athlete. I think so often, even in, childhood and high school, college, you lump athletes in one category. And if you don't associate and identify with them, you may think that you can never become athletic or a fitness guru or anything like that. And I just wanted to give a plug for that because we're never too old to get our body in motion. And I think just staying physically active is very important. So thank you for identifying that way and sharing that with us. That's
absolutely.
awesome.
Sure. I am a strong advocate, and I don't go to the sort of a big commercial gym. I go to the small place, one on one with the trainer. There's a couple of trainers. They have classes and one on one. And everybody, if you look at them, you would never, if you pass them, the clients on the street, you would never think that this 78-year-old, 72-year-old grandmother can lift
Right.
more than her weight.
Right.
Or, I mean, it's amazing. And I would never leave that place probably, and I would encourage everybody to do that. And going back to how do you recover from burnout? Is it possible? Is it not?
Yeah.
It's a very gray area. I'm not going to sit here and say, oh, there's a magic bullet. However, important what's important to do, and going back to when you brought up the question, how which activity is going to basically motivate you, which may burn you out, it is important for us to do daily something that gives us satisfaction, just for us,
Mm-hmm.
just for you, whether it's watching Netflix or walk or read something
Mm-hmm.
or getting a massage or something, from the small to something big, something gets giving you
Mm-hmm.
some sort of satisfaction and pleasure. And that is a big step on recovering from burnout.
Right. Right.
Other than taking a break, taking a
Mm-hmm.
rest, being aware and all of that.
Yeah.
But this is something, it's like a prescription. This is something that any one of us can do for ourselves.
Right. And it does require intentionality. And I know a lot of people who are high
Hmm.
productive people, they may not want to make time for themselves in that way. They may think that it's selfish or have this association that they don't have time for it. And that, everything else and everyone else comes before them. And taking a massage or going for a walk, I mean, that's crazy.
Mm,
I don't have time for that.
right.
I can't, spend money that way or whatever the case is. And to your point, it's prescriptive. It's a um, I
It
mean,
is.
not like a prescription from a doctor necessarily, but it's something that's just as important where you have to build it into your lifestyle and recognize that these are my new non-negotiables if I want to be healthy, if I want to get back to center and have, these boundaries in place. Like this is how I maintain my homeostasis, my baseline, so that I can show up for you and myself and everyone around me to the best of my ability. And without these things in place, I'm not going to be at my best, which will then, affect performance and
Absolutely.
mood and all these other
Hmm.
things. You mentioned too that you are going 150%, which I think ties in really well to this topic that we're talking about of making time for yourself. But when we all think about going 110% at work or whatever it is, that usually comes from a place of ambition. We have career goals, we have family to impress, we have ourselves where we want acknowledgments or accolades or whatever. Like there's some driving, motivating force behind you and within you to push you to that extent. Otherwise, why would we be giving ourselves, 150% to a 9 to 5? So you had shared with me too, and I'm just going to read part of this because I really liked how you said it and I want to make sure I capture it properly. But I know recently you were interviewed with a college newspaper in Canada, actually. And I know you shared that it was picked up
Yes,
with other
the
media
cord,
outlets. What's it called?
the cord, CORD,
The Cord. Okay, very cool. So,
the
and they
cord. Yeah.
and it was the story itself was picked up by other media outlets as well to help with exposure on this topic of burnout. But you had said this to me. You said, I was thinking how everyone speaks about their success story and so on. And I think people can connect with the situations where people couldn't succeed in life because of their past experiences and traumas. And I just loved that sentence or that thought so much because
Mhm.
so often we have this idea of who we're going to become in life, in our career, within our family, outside of our family, whatever it is. We have an idea of who we're going to be as a person on this planet. And for whatever reason, at some point, you may reach a plateau. You may hit a stumbling block, an obstacle, or you just may come to the realization that I'm not going to get as high or as far as I thought I was in the way that I have been doing this. So what do I do now? And how important is it to me to kind of continue on that path and make that a reality versus maybe finding new alignment, following my intuition or something like that. So when you talk about traumas and their role in how we find success in life and what you went through with burnout, how did that look for you and what would you want to share with anyone who may be going through that right now or have some experience with that in their own lives?
Well, in my research about burnout, I looked at the different facets of this disease and why it happens and to whom it happens to. And a lot of times, I've seen more and more research supported data that burnout not necessarily happens to, not always happens to people who having, let's say, a bad job, or let's say they're in the career that looks fabulous to the outside world, but they're being pushed hard by their positions and everything and obligations, and they're really tired, burnout, depressed, on whatever have you. There are a lot of people who are, let's say, they're prominent physicians working for themselves. And I've listened to a data that being presented by this psychologist, and she said, he made plenty of income, he could retire early and everything, but why is he so burnt out? He has the world on the platter. He can do whatever he wants. And she had many clients like that, many patients, and she'd done her own research. And she said, what happened to these people? They entered the wrong profession. They entered the wrong profession. They entered the profession that is not their calling, that's not their aptitude for different reasons. Your parents pushed you. You were scolded in school. You were bullied in school. Let's say your favorite girlfriend dumped you in high school, and you say, "I'll show you, who I can become." People have different reasons. People have different traumatic experience that pushed them on a career path that simply wasn't suitable to them. And to say your psyche may not be ready for that level of compassion that you have to extend to your patients, and not that you don't extend it, but you enter a burnout of compassion fatigue when the clinical situations of patients that keep coming and coming and coming at you, and after being a doctor for, let's say, practicing for 30 plus years, you cannot take it anymore, and you completely burn out to the crisp, even though on the outside, to everybody else, you're a prominent physician. They say, what else can he want? He already says, works only 20 hours a week. That's what her patient was.
Yeah,
Why is he so sick? Why is he so burned out? Why? Because he initially was in the wrong profession, in the wrong career path.
right. It's
And
amazing.
that is something.
I was just going to say, it's amazing that you brought that up because I was just listening to a podcast with Lori Gottlieb and Stephen Bartlett on the Diary of a CEO, which, as some of my listeners know, that's one of my favorite podcasts. And Lori had written this book that I read a while ago, so I had already become familiar with her work and was really interested in hearing what she had to share on the show. And she said something about how we will find professions in the world that are acceptable to put our unhealed traumas, right? So if we are trying to kind of replace or displace something that's causing us tension in our lives, maybe we'll, instead of going through therapy or healing in a healthy way, we'll just take it out on something else. So for instance, she pointed out that physicians, surgeons who cut into people may have a lot of anger within them that they haven't dealt with. Or you may see MMA fighters who have a lot of
Could be.
anger, and this is how they take out their anger. And from the outside, exactly as you described, if you're a doctor, the world respects you. You should have everything you want. You should be super happy. And yet they may have so much hurt and pain and anger inside that they just haven't released out of their body. And the only way they can, or the way that they've found to be societally or socially acceptable, and maybe even meeting those expectations from their family and their parents, is to go down this path, you know, and to be a world-renowned surgeon and be exceptional at their career, while kind of like killing themselves inside for not dealing with the stuff that, you know, is eating away at them personally.
And on a smaller level, something similar has happened to me because I know that your podcast is becoming you. And what was a defining moment for me? I had entered a medical school and I was on the career path to becoming a medical doctor, and that was at the urging of my parents. I have worked really hard. I had a science background and everything. However, once my time in medical school transitioned from, let's say, lecture halls to clinics, once I started to work in rotations, hand in hand and face to face with patients, I could not handle it emotionally. I have experienced compassion fatigue, which I didn't realize it at that point, that's what happened to me. I just knew that I couldn't go on. I took a year off, then I took another year off, which was devastating to my parents. And then I entered a career in healthcare administration, and I started to grow. So the guilt that I carried with me, that I really disappointed my parents not to pursue a career that they wanted me to, was so heavy that I kept climbing. And I thought that with every job that I took, I had to dive in deep, and had to do 150% more than it was expected of me, and opened up more and more Pandora boxes because people started to lean on you. And I always had that underlying thought that if I could only do more, if I could only, let's say, produce more or make more or get a higher position, I am going to validate my career choices. And while I was getting sick and burning out, I actually had a delusional understanding of where I stood. I thought if I stop working, if I take a break, the whole world is stopping. They all rely on me. Nothing, I couldn't. Well, yes, I could. I read somewhere, I think on either LinkedIn or somewhere, there was a little post-it that said, if you don't take time to take care of your wellness, your illness will make sure that you do.
Oh my gosh.
And when you collapse, you're going to have nothing but time.
Right.
You're going to be forced into it.
Right. Your body's going to make sure you stop moving, that you stop trying to make all these things happen. Wow.
Right, exactly.
Such a catchy phrase. I love catchy phrases like that because they kind of stick in your head, a shorter one that kind of, at least to me, like I would put it in the same category, but health is wealth, and prioritizing our health is more invaluable than chasing that higher paycheck, sometimes. And especially in the way that you just described, where we're kind of sacrificing ourselves just to have a higher check to validate the career choice we made because someone thinks that it is, embarrassing or not good enough or whatever the case is. And I've even experienced that throughout my life. I've had certain professions or people within those professions look at me and look down on me for the job I had at various points in my life. And the irony was I was making more money than they were, but I guess in their mind, the role I had was more, I don't know, embarrassing's not really the right word I'm trying to think of, but like it was pretty much like they were looking down on me.
Not significant enough.
Yeah, right,
Not
exactly.
significant enough in the societal hierarchy.
Correct.
And that's a
Exactly.
big deal.
Yeah.
It's a big deal. It's a big deal that it's one of the wrong motivational factors that drive a lot of people into a burnout stage.
Hmm.
The societal pressure.
Yeah.
We were let's say when they ask you how you doing, you say, "Oh, I'm so busy these days." You would never say, "Well, I'm finishing, the romance novel. I just spend an hour a day on the couch." It was like, "Oh my goodness,
Oh
that's just like,
no.
oh
Yeah.
no,
I
this is
would
not what you're supposed to answer."
No, I would never tell. I'm like I'm feeling that in my body right now when you just said that. I don't think I would ever tell anyone I
Mhm.
spent an hour on the couch. And it's not that I don't
Exactly.
spend hours on the couch, I do, but I just would never tell
But this is
somebody
not
that.
something that we feel proud of.
No, no.
You may say that you went out for a run because that's considered to be an accomplishment.
Right, right.
But you would never say, I just took a bubble bath. I just hung in that bubble bath for an hour with a candle reading a book.
Yeah, yeah.
You're going to be looking at so what? And this is
Right,
what, Wednesday
right.
at noon?
Well, and that's the thing. I
She took
mean,
an hour or two from work?
yeah, right, right. If it's a close friend who's aligned on those values, then maybe taking some self-care time like that would resonate with them and that would be a safe space to share something like that. But the truth is, if we just told any random stranger that who's asking us how we're doing or what are we up to, they may look at us like, wow, you must have all the time in the world. And maybe there's like this layer of judgment that crosses over and instead of recognizing it for the value that it is, which is investing in ourselves and taking those moments, those deliberate moments of rest where you can actually recharge and feel better afterwards, they just see it as something that they're not making time for. So now they're going to put you down for it. And that's almost a lack of self care on our part if we're just blindly sharing these things and opening ourselves up vulnerably to that attack. And so a lot of times we won't even lead by example when it comes to self care because so many people have this negative impression of it that you're not taking care of your other
Hmm.
responsibilities if you're filling your own cup, which is really
Absolutely.
unfortunate because if we normalized it, then more people would feel comfortable doing it themselves.
Absolutely. And you just mentioned a very key phrase, a safe space.
Mm,
The space is not safe because, like I said, only maybe very, very close person that you can mention to that you did something to recharge yourself. We cannot normally, because it's not normalized, mention it at work.
right.
I am exhausted. I just need a few minutes of break. Or I just need to have, let's say, a cup of tea and step away in the corner where nobody calls my name, or maybe walk around outside. It's not normalized. And on any given day, like you said, instead of running a 5 miles or lifting 250 pounds, that's what we're proud of to say. No, we were in a bubble bath or on the couch. It's not safe for us to mention it in a casual, like as a normal situation.
Yeah.
However, we normally would recharge our phone or a laptop or a tablet because we know the device needs to be recharged, but we don't look at ourselves that we need to be recharged. We look at ourselves that we're full of resources that are completely expandable
Yeah.
and do not need to be recharged.
Yeah. Oh man, you're making me think of so many different things. Like the fact that people look at this as a weakness, the fact that our bodies need to
Hmm.
sleep at night to recharge. That's one of the most basic ways that you can recharge is getting a good night's sleep. And so many people don't make time for that either. And we kind of abuse our bodies. We expect them to have unlimited bandwidth and just keep going and going and going, like the Energizer Bunny, which is a battery, which eventually a battery runs out of juice too. Like none of these things that we try to be like
Absolutely.
and try to emulate are, without limits and never need to be recharged. So that's such a great perspective and a great visual to keep in mind. And hopefully,
Absolutely.
anyone, I mean, the thing is,
And
oh, go ahead.
awareness is a big deal because Unfortunately, burnout is becoming younger
Right.
for
Affecting younger
obvious
people.
reasons because of the connectivity, the workload, and expanding days. But nobody is warning us. Nobody is warning the younger generations. If you look at the commencement ceremonies at the graduations, who is warning the graduates that you have to know, you have to have the courage to pace yourself, to get ahead better, to produce better? No, everybody's being told, no, you gotta, you gotta charge, you gotta do this, you gotta do that. But not everybody has the same ability, physically or emotionally.
Yep.
But everybody is being given the same structure. That basically, if you're not where we think you should be right now, that you're not working hard enough. It's you who is not working hard enough. And that's really a sad message.
Yeah, to kind of blame the victim, right? Or blame the person who's already
Hmm.
striving so hard and putting their health and wellness at risk and asking for more from them. I mean, we're squeezing these lemons dry. You mentioned something too that basically people have gone through an entire career and it's the end of their career and they're experiencing a ton of health issues. And maybe it's traced back to choosing the wrong career in the first place. But the pattern is very similar across the board. People spend their lives working, they spend their lives giving to a
Hmm.
job, an employer, whatever the case is, giving it, trading time for dollars. We hear that phrase a lot, only to sacrifice their
Hmm.
health. So by the time they have some free time, time for themselves, where maybe they think, okay, now I'll finally put back into myself, it's too late. It's too little, too late. Your body, your mind are not even used to you investing in yourself in that way. I don't even know if they'd be prepared or capable of handling it as we get older. I know you can keep teaching yourself new things, but if you're not actually nourishing that along the way, I don't even know how capable you'd be to
Hmm.
just flip the switch like that in reality. But at the same time, you've already kind of abused so much along the way that it's hard for your body to just be like, okay, now we can relax. Like there, that's when you see a lot of those sicknesses and those diseases kind of coming to light because it's just caught up with you. It's never actually left your body. That trauma has stayed inside and it's kind of,
Hmm.
rotted from the inside out.
Absolutely. And as you know, I started a nonprofit organization. And the reason why I started this nonprofit, because I analyzed the position that I sort of found myself in. In mid 50s, I'm far from retirement, and yet I'm too sick to produce, to be as productive as I was.
Hmm.
And I started, as the more I researched about this disease, the more I realized what was happening to me, the more I met people on these Zoom calls and conversations on the phone, men, women, younger. A lot of them were in the mid to late 20s and mid 30s. And really, like I said, burnout is becoming younger now. I realized, so here's the situation. You're too ill to work. You have no resources to turn to. What do you do?
Hmm.
And this my position, my realization sort of brought me to the point that what if there is an organization that can provide tangible resources for it? And unfortunately, nowadays, although burnout becomes becoming younger, the really ill people who suffer burnout are in their mid 50s. And that's sad because you're too young to retire, you're
Right.
too young to enjoy your retirement income or whatever have you, but you're too ill to work.
Right. And you're so
And
close to the finish line too. If we think of 65 as retirement and your mid 50s, you're so close but so far away at the same time. That is very stressful in and of itself, which isn't going to help with the symptoms of burnout, and the wear and tear on the body.
mhm, exactly, that's what it is, the wear and tear on the body. And when you have somebody like me who have severe clinical symptoms, and these people really need tangible help. They need help to step away and recover. They need help to resources for counseling, for career coaching, life coaching, success coaching, for somebody to, because you want to find your tribe. There's another one very, very prevalent situation where victims of burnout find themselves. They're very lonely.
Mm,
And that's because, oh, I'm so lonely. No, they started to isolate themselves
right.
by default
Hmm.
while they work towards being burnout. Suddenly you find yourself, you don't have the time for your friends, for your family, you barely speak to your partner, and you're becoming so emotionally lonely and alone. So then when it comes to the
Well,
point when you're
because
very sick,
too, like,
you have no tribe to turn to.
no, you don't. And because they're carrying this flag of honor of being busy and they're not sharing what they're going through with anyone. So those connections that they had in their life aren't deepening. They're not sharing vulnerability or overcoming any challenges together. So it's creating distance, which at the end of the day, once you're on this island by yourself, the distance sometimes is too great for people to throw you a life raft, or be there for you. And then you feel like, I don't want to be a burden to
Absolutely.
anyone because they have this idea that I'm so busy, I'm so successful. I can't let them not have that idea of me, and that's where that people pleasing tendency comes in, where you want to kind of manipulate and control what other people are thinking of you at the expense of really being who you really are and even asking for help. We all need help.
Absolutely. I again, anecdotally, I just wanted to mention when towards the later stages of my burnout, when I was extremely sick, I was so fatigued. I was falling asleep at the red lights driving, and really in a dire strait, severe vertigo, throwing up on the way to work. It was really bad. But my husband was telling me, but calling in sick, it wasn't an option for me. Never.
Yeah.
It was beneath me.
Yeah.
I felt if I'm physically standing on my 2 feet, I am going.
Yeah.
And I'm not going to go disheveled.
Right.
So, no, no, no. I'm all dressed in my business suits, the pearls, the pins, hair is done, makeup is done, in stilettos. So, one of these mornings, my husband turned around to me. He said, "Look at yourself." He said, "You running to that garage to get in the car, to get into your commute." He said, and he was driving me to my commuter bus. He said, "You were running to that car ahead of me." He said, "Who is going to believe you that you're sick? Your bosses or your employees? Who is going to have any compassion?" He said, "I have a hard time believing you're sick." Because he said, a sick person is sick in bed, period. He said, "I don't see it any other way."
Yeah.
So this is how you become, and I was putting such a guardrails around me, almost like, leave me alone, don't judge me, people need me, and this is how you become isolated.
Hmm.
Somebody's spouse may stay in touch with you emotionally, and some may isolate you. Say, you know what, you're going down the tubes, you're going to hell, you're going alone.
Right.
I have met people in my research who lost families, who lost their marriages, they lost their home, they lost a big position in the executive suite or prominent business, only to end up being extremely sick, being cared by their parents, moving into their childhood bedroom because they physically couldn't stand up anymore. They was collapsed.
Um,
And this is how, to recover from that, you do need to find your tribe. You do need to find people who will have the courage, who have enough courage to share their stories. And the only space where they can share their stories, that is a safe space, like you said. You need a safe space. You need people who maybe trade their expertise, people who trade their ideas, and and get tangible resources. And this is what I'm working on. And it's very fulfilling.
I know. And I love that you are taking, your experience and just turning it into something that's so beneficial. And yet, obviously, you are finding a way to pace yourself while doing this project. This is not a small project that you've undertaken by any means. But it's a great opportunity to kind of lead by that example of having boundaries and pacing the work and, paying it forward too, letting other people know, hey, you may be experiencing this, you may not have the words for it, but some of these things might resonate with you. And here's some resources, here's some ideas of what you can start implementing today to hopefully get yourself back on track and avoid, making things any worse for yourself. Because at the end of the day, it is our responsibility to take care of our own health and to make sure that other people respect and see what we may be going through. Exactly as your husband pointed out to you. I mean, human beings love their stories. There's a lot of like drama and gossip and chatting around the water cooler, whatever it is, but people love those stories and they have to be believable as well. That's why you have certain leaders that rise to the top, because they're visionaries and they're able to tell their stories in such a compelling way that excites people, and they kind of all fall in line. They want to follow this leader. And to people who are maybe more direct, like I've noticed this in myself too, I kind of just get to the point a little too quickly sometimes. I don't tell the flowery story. I don't necessarily look for the buy-in ahead of saying, hey, this is the problem we need to solve, like let's go and solve it. You have to tell that story about why, right? So if you're home and you're sick, or you need time away from work, but you're putting on this front that you're okay and you're invincible, people may think that you're faking it. Your character may come into question, and all of that. And that's just like one example, but that's why our stories have to align with our reality and maybe even our goals. Like all of those things should fall into place in a way that makes sense. So this story arc that you're creating is something that someone else can follow and they can believe in and be on your side and be your strongest supporter and advocate, no matter what part of that story you're in, right? There's lows, there's highs. It's not a linear path, but you just want it to be authentic throughout, and just being a great storyteller, in that way, I think is really important.
Absolutely.
Hmm.
And to your point, I did come under criticism, and it was, devastating for me at work. I came under criticism from coworkers, from my bosses. They were saying something that I love working with you and I hate working with you.
Weird.
I had heard when people said, you make other people who work next to you feel bad about themselves. And I burst into tears once. I said, how could this be? How? I'm like a mother goose. I love to lead with example. I don't expect you to put more of your life than you put into work as I do. I don't expect you to be like me, but I lead by example because I want people to be motivated. And it's actually played the opposite, it had an opposite effect.
Yeah. And that's,
People made, I made them feel bad.
yeah. And it's very good
And that was really
self-awareness.
devastating.
I'm sure it was devastating to hear that. The fact that you were able to hear it as kind of constructive feedback too, and become self-aware through it, and just see another perspective. Like your side of things was, hey, we can all be better. We can be our best selves. And their side was like, this is what I'm capable of doing. And you're trying to push me past my capabilities. So in a sense, that was their way of expressing their own boundaries, but it's also good for over or high achievers to hear that type of feedback, because our influence can have a negative or positive effect on those around us, especially if we may be coming across like we expect this from everyone else around us, so it is just really good practice to be mindful of how are you coming across, what expectations do you have on other people, what expectations do you have on yourself that maybe subliminally other people are interpreting as, something that you expect from them too. And how can we kind of balance the fact that we all offer something different. We bring different talents to the table, and they're not all going to look the same. So there's no need to assume that everyone can do the same things.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I had to stop and I would send a text to the employee just to ask them a question. Because as I was burning out, as my memory was failing, and if I remember something, I have to address to it now because I'll forget.
Yeah.
And I've had people push back saying that they do not answer a text on the weekend. And I would never, of course, I wouldn't reprimand them for it, but it felt me. I felt devastated. I felt devastated that I over basically sort of infringed on somebody's boundaries. I had to question my own integrity. I had to question my own, um, you know, goodness as a person, because the way I was, people were actually my employees before they got to know me. When I first entered the work, and you hit the ground running and everything, they were actually thinking something nefarious about me. What if she's trying to prove? What if what is going on here? And then when they learned how I was, they were heavily leaning on me. So I really I could say that I didn't benefit. The only thing that benefit was the company
Yeah.
and my patients,
Yeah.
but I really sort of did it to myself, and I would not recommend to anyone to to be this way. We should be good at establishing our own boundaries and respecting other people's boundaries.
Absolutely. And thank you for sharing that. I know that's not the easiest as a leader to share, where we have some shortcomings or blind spots. But I really appreciate you sharing that, because a great example that we see too is if our boss goes on vacation, but they're checking their emails throughout vacation. Well, when I take my time off, I may feel like I need to do the same thing because that was what my boss was doing. So if we see our leader truly breaking away from work, whether it's the weekend or it's time off with family, and not checking in on emails or Slack messages or whatever the case is, then we'll feel free to be able to take that same time to ourselves when the time comes, and not feel guilty and not feel like there was a unspoken expectation to show up in this way, based on someone else's example. So I'm really proud too, by association, of your team who was able to feel comfortable enough to share that feedback with you. If they didn't feel comfortable with you, I don't think they would have even shared it with you. So I think you were definitely doing something right in that regard, right? Where people felt like, hey, I can tell Yana that this feels a little crunchy to me right now, but I don't feel that I'm going to be reprimanded or have any type of retaliation by sharing this with her. And hopefully by sharing it, she'll have, some enlightenment onto what I'm experiencing. And your empathy alone just speaks to that ability to see what another person's going through, and to, like you said, adjust just to respect their boundaries. And again, boundaries are not rules for other people, but it's nice to just be mindful. If someone has a certain boundary in place, it's easy to just step around it. You don't have to poke at it for any reason, just to kind of like trigger
Absolutely.
it. um,
Absolutely. And speaking of, let's say, a different profession, I'm just going to give you an example. One of my former bosses, her husband he was a fairly prominent attorney in New York City, and he was honored as one of the brightest young attorneys in the United States at some point. So this is how, in that particular profession, things work. On a Friday afternoon, before, let's say there's a long weekend, let's say Labor Day, Memorial Day, whatever have you, he would be sent a brief that's over 1,000 pages
oh my
to
gosh.
be discussed
Yeah.
on a Tuesday after the long weekend. So basically, it's a race. Whoever pushes that button before 5 p.m., whoever is the last one who sent that ball to the other guy's court, is having a long weekend. And the guy who had that brief landed in his mailbox doesn't, because he's expected to come in on Tuesday after the long weekend, fully read that brief and fully ready, guns blazing, because he was hoping to make a partner in a prominent firm, to have been delivering, his remarks or business as usual. So, speaking of his situation, he was completely burned out. He has so much work that he could never go home. He would go at dinner time down there's a gym in his building on Wall Street. He would eat dinner, he would shower at the gym, he would work out, shower at the gym, and go back upstairs. At some point, he was banned from the gym because he was working so hard to get his energy up. He passed out.
Oh my gosh. And we
And
hear
they actually told him, you can't be doing this.
yeah. And we see things like that all the
So
time.
it's sad.
Right, where they kind of dangle a carrot in front of someone to try to get them to
Mhm.
perform. And then it's kind of a bait and switch because they don't necessarily make good on whatever that promise was. And now this person has laid it all out there and
Mhm.
they've made all this effort and they have nothing to show for it. It is really sad, like you said. And Yana, I just want to thank you so much for being on the show. This conversation has
Sure.
been so fruitful. We've covered so much. And I know anyone listening who wants to connect with you can look up your nonprofit, A Bridge to Thrive, to being the number 2 in that, A Bridge to Thrive. And then they can find you on LinkedIn and wherever
Thank
else you
you.
are. I'm happy to put all the links below. Do you have any final thoughts that you want to share with the audience before we come to a close here?
Sure. I know it's going to sound proverbial and trivial, but take care of yourself. Put yourself first. And this is not a selfish um, saying or motivation, because if you do not put yourself first, no one else will. A loving child, an appreciative boss, or a loving partner in your life are not going to put you first, not because of the malicious thoughts, but because they simply do not know how much you need it. Only you know what you need. And don't be afraid, don't be bashful. You have to put yourself first. You have to recharge yourself, know what makes you feel good, and be brave enough to do that, to recharge and recover so you can go on successfully.
Perfect. We have all the answers within us. I really believe that. Thank you so much, Yana. Thanks for being
Yeah,
on the show.
absolutely. My pleasure. I had so much fun. Thank you so much for inviting me again, Katrina. Thank you.
Absolutely. You are my most important listener, and I can't thank you enough for spending your time with me. If this content resonates with you, then hit subscribe. Connect with me on LinkedIn, Instagram, and YouTube by following @ConnectorQueen. Thank you for tuning in, and I'll see you again on the next episode of Becoming You.